It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm a very big fan of CFSI and everything they've been doing, partly because what I like to do is to focus very much on our research, what we find about the way people make decisions, and I tend to assume that you guys know much better than I or we do about how to apply it. So what I'm going to do is, for those of you who didn't get the book or don't feel like reading it, I'll give you a very brief précis of what we did, what we found, what we think it might imply. I'll spend relatively little time focusing on what it might mean for your specific work, but I'll mention some general points, and then we can discuss further in the format that follows. So the way, let me see, did I learn how to use this? Good. The way Senable and Adhan and I, who was a co-author in the book, and many colleagues and postdocs and graduate students who worked very hard, the way we started this is we were really interested in the way in which people make decisions in context of poverty. That was really the focus of our research. And the reason it becomes very interesting in the social sciences is that the poor just behave badly. And the question then, of course, is how do we explain it? What does it mean? But if you look throughout the social sciences, if you look at healthcare, we have solved many important problems in healthcare today. All that remains is for people to take their medications. People do not do that well, and the poor are the biggest culprits. If you look at simple weeding in the fields of India, weeding is very important for your income. It's a pretty low-skill activity, easy to do. People fail to weed appropriately, and the poor farmers weed less than their friends in the field next over. Parenting, lots of books and other pronouncements critiquing the parenting of the poor. They're inconsistent in their disciplining, they're inattentive, they're doing things very badly. In the world of finance, I don't need to tell it to this room, but things like payday loans and others make people look very, very myopic and unthinking and impulsive and just not wise. So this is sort of where we started, trying to understand what is it that makes it look this way. We come with a bias. I'm a cognitive psychologist. I come with a simple bias that assumes that our brains are identical and we process information in very similar ways. And basically, it's contextual nuance that shapes the way we end up behaving. So that's what we start in trying to understand what is it that makes these behaviors look the way they are. In the social sciences in general, there have been many, many attempts to try to explain, to understand the link between poverty and behavior, everything from peer effects to neighborhood effects, et cetera. I want to point out, for those who are into this sort of thing, I'm not claiming these are not part of the story. Some probably are, some are more than others, so this is not an attempt to replace them. But it's an attempt to focus on another issue, which is the psychology that emerges when people don't have enough. So that's going to be not to replace other things, but focus on this particular explaining factor and see what it does for us in trying to understand what it is that emerges when people live in context of scarcity. So that's what Sen and I did in this book. We did not plan to get to where we ended up getting. We ended up getting to what we think is a very general psychology that's not just about poverty of money. It's psychology that emerges when you feel you don't have enough. It could be time, it could be money, it could be calories if you're dieting, it could be friends if you're lonely. And in the book, we discuss much more of the common features to all this. Good. The basic message of the book is that conditions of scarcity, of not having enough, produce their own psychology. And that psychology, when you put it in context of not having enough, makes bad things happen. Okay, so that's going to be the proposal that comes out in the book. We use a metaphor that's, I think, kind of a nice mnemonic device. So I'll throw it at you. It's not a perfect metaphor, but it captures something. And that's of people basically traveling through life with a suitcase. That's their budget. Some have a larger suitcase with more slack in it, and some have a very tightly packed suitcase. And the argument is going to be, when you travel through life with a very small, tightly packed suitcase, you just have to work a lot harder. You have to focus very carefully on what you put in the suitcase. You have to literally, it's a cognitively demanding computational task to fit in as best you can, and it leads to error. So if you think about going away for the weekend, you put on your bed a big, large suitcase, you start tossing in the things you need. Let's assume you do this in decreasing order of importance. You're not going to take everything that's in the house, so you toss the top 10 things, and you're ready, and it didn't take you very long. You didn't have to focus. There's slack left in the suitcase. You're ready to go. Now imagine the same thing with a very small suitcase. You start putting things in. By think 6 or 7, you're running out of room, and now you have to stop and focus and decide, what do I take? You're entering trade-off thinking. Do I take the boots? Do I take the coat? You become also an expert on which shoes take more room and which shoes take less, because now that matters in your small suitcase. When you travel, and you see a pair of shoes you like, If you have a big suitcase, you say, is the price right? And if it is, you take the shoes and you throw them in your suitcase that has room in it. If you have a very tight suitcase, you see the pair of shoes, you ask, is the price right? And what do I have to take out of my suitcase to make room for the shoes? You're entering trade-off thinking mode. And the argument is going to be, in everyday life, that's going to make a big impact. What's interesting, economic theory assumes that there is scarcity everywhere. Every $10 you spend are $10 you'll never see again, even if you're Gates. Psychologically, this is not how it happens. So psychologically, for many people in this room, when we go throughout our day buying sandwiches and lunches and coffees and books and CDs, we rarely stop to ask, what will I not buy instead? It's as if we're reaching into an infinite bucket of small expenses. The person who sells you the coffee or the bagel or the book, they do ask themselves, if I have lunch with a friend, how do I manage the kids' school uniform? And that constant, nonstop trade-off thinking is going to alter the work and the cognitive attention you devote to issues of packing and of managing your suitcase. So that's going to be the metaphor. And what that means is, if you simply look at trade-off thinking, we have a lot of data. If you simply ask people, what do you think about when you buy a toaster or a TV or whatever it is in different countries, the poor, those who have lower income, are much more likely to report, in fact, as I just suggested, I think about what I might not be able to buy instead, as opposed to the less poor who think about it less often. Similarly, you become an expert on pricing. And so one of my favorite examples we did at the train station in Boston, where when people come out of the train station, we get their household income, and then we ask them, by the way, when you walk into a cabin in Boston, what does the meter read? What is the initial fee? Now, it's cute because clearly the rich take taxis much more than the poor, but they're much less likely to know the answer. And so the point is that when you don't care about the small items in the packing, you have the luxury when you walk into a cab to kind of look out the window and enjoy the scene. The person who's packing carefully is focusing on those prices. And there's research on single mothers in Boston, for example, who literally consider how much money they'll save by going to shop in Somerville as opposed to Roxbury. How does that compare to the price of the cab? So these are the kind of things you become an expert on as you pack carefully. And the point is that the story is going to be that as you manage, you juggle your everyday finances with such care, you do what we call tunnel. You tunnel on the urgent stuff. You're constantly busy managing what really is important to you and needs immediate attention at the expense of things that are important that remain in the periphery. And this is, you can actually use a real visual metaphor. It literally turns out in vision, if you do work on vision, as you focus more carefully on a target, as you're driving more carefully on a rainy night, your perception of the periphery diminishes. You're less likely to detect a car coming from the side. And so the idea here is, again, as you're focusing, juggling, managing your everyday needs, other stuff that you might consider and know and realize is very important for you, and this will come back to discuss later, you might understand exactly the importance of savings for retirement. It's that it's less urgent today. It's important, but it's less urgent. And it's less urgent tomorrow as well. And that's the issue that arises. Now, I'd like to have a couple of side comments here. This audience requires it less, but many audiences I talk to, and you'll have experienced this before, there's often a question, what are you talking about the American poor? These are people who, if you put them in India, they'd be middle class. And so I want to make this very clear. I'm entering this from a very behavioral perspective. For me, the psychology is what matters, and it's very easy to be psychologically poor in America today. So you don't have to be starving, nothing like that. You just have to not have enough to live a minimally acceptable life in a place and time in which you live. So it's a very non-defensive, very clear definition of what it means. And it's important because you may have seen the Heritage Foundation report a couple years ago. There's many like these that sort of counts how many Americans have color TVs, as if you can buy black and white if you wanted to. And how many have air conditioning in the car? It turns out you cannot buy a car without air conditioning today, et cetera. And to me, this is interesting. I devote a minute to it because, as opposed to other ideas that come up, you can see where it comes from. It's not completely crazy. It takes a minute to think about it and see why really it should play no role. But in the first encounter with it, and that's why I give it minimal respect, there is a sense in which, yes, it's a little perplexing. And so it's important to understand the relative role this plays. And again, it's important to me because when this came out, it was reported everywhere, but nobody really commented on it. Nobody said why it's profoundly silly, except for the real observers of the American scene. So Colbert says, this report proves that poor people are just not living down to our expectations. If you still have strength to brush flies off your eyes, you're not really poor. You know, this is it's a crass way to express exactly the idea. Unless you're really, really poor, let's stop talking about you as poor. John Stewart says, never realized that poor people had it so good in this country. No wonder the middle class is pouring into their ranks and droves. And the reason, again, this is so profound is because Adam Smith, 300 years earlier, solves this very clearly. And he says, you know, it used to be that a laborer in England was not required to wear a linen shirt to work. Now that you are expected to wear one, if you can't afford it, you're poor. And so this is important because, you know, take internet. Internet, you know, 25 minutes ago was a complete science fiction dream. But today, if your kid requires internet to download her homework and you can't afford it, you're poor. And so there's no real profound distinction there. And this is important also because some of the data that I'll show you, some of the research that we do, is not about people living in abject poverty. I mean, we have data on soup kitchens, but that's not the point. It's about people who are budget concerned. It's about 100 to 150 million Americans. And that's important because that's enough psychologically to feel like you're threatened in terms of juggling and managing your everyday finances in ways that feel comfortable. The other comment that I spend more time in the book than I will today is, I mentioned before, you can be poor not just in money. So many people in this room, for example, are time poor in ways that are very similar to the way that our subjects are money poor. I have a good friend who paints houses. He works very hard from 9 to 5, and if I come to him afterwards and say, do you want to go to the movies? He says, what's the movie? And sure. If I go to Jennifer in the room and say, do you want to go to the movies? She says, what's the movie? And what do I not do tonight that I was going to do tonight that I have to do tomorrow? This is trade-off thinking. And so it's a very similar logic. Temptations are an interesting one. Things that are standard for many people in America today are temptations to those who have less. Lunch with a friend. It's often a temptation you need to resist. There's actually a lot of work in behavioral psych on how resisting temptation again and again actually depletes you, makes you less able to resist the next one, but I'm not going to go there today. Just to say the logic of it, just like you have to resist temptations when you don't have enough money, many of us have to resist temptations when we don't have enough time. It could be going to the gym less than you'd like because you can't afford it, or simply think about the average American person who's had a successful life. How about spending a couple hours with your children every day? That should be standard. For many of us, that's become a luxury that we need to sort of resist. And if we don't resist, we sit with them and think about something else. We're not even there psychologically. So there's a classic case where temptation emerges just from the poverty of time. There's a lot of anger about the poor who are sitting on debt they cannot afford, yet they buy little indulgences for their children. And my question to you is, how many of you are sitting in this room right now on time commitments you won't be able to abide by? And if so, what are you doing schmoozing here with me? You should go back and finish what you need to do. And so there's a very similar logic to many of these. And in general, the point is that everything becomes more consequential. When you're sitting at the edge, obviously you know this very well, any mistake, any oversight, any glitch costs you a lot more when you have little than when you have a lot. So that's the story. And now I'm going to give you some quick overview of the research. The idea, again, being that simply having not enough scarcity forms a demand on your cognitive capacity. We walk around with very limited cognitive capacity, much less than we tend to intuitively appreciate. The fact that when you talk on a cell phone, no hands held, just being on a cell phone, makes you drive like you're legally drunk in terms of your ability to detect peripheral obstacles, something that we just intuitively do not believe. We can hear it, go back in the car, me included, and go on the phone because we think we can do better, but we can't. So this is kind of the issue. One study that's beautiful that we review, there's many, but I'll give you one. This is a school in New Haven where researchers discovered that the kids were randomly assigned into two classrooms, one of which happened to be on the quiet side of the school, and the other half of the kids were in a classroom near the train tracks in New Haven. So on an occasional basis throughout the day, a train would go by and make some noise out the window. And yes, we appreciate that trains make some noises. There it is. What kind of noise, what kind of impact does it have? What these researchers found is that the kids who were on the railroad side of the school in 5th grade were 1 year behind in academic performance. That's a massive effect for having some trains outside the window. They then installed insulation, and the kids caught up. It's a beautiful study. And the point is this. The point is that you don't need trains outside the building to have this effect. You can sit in a quiet room all on your own, and it's peaceful, and you have mental trains. And if you're concerned about stuff and you're worried about things that you cannot fully control, those mental trains will have an impact very similar on your cognitive capacity and your ability to attend, on your thinking and your working memory that we're seeing with these kids. Okay, that's sort of the proposal. So I'll give you a couple of studies just to give you a sense of how this works. This is a study done not by us, but it's a perfect illustration. These are subjects who come to a lab having been asked not to drink for 4 hours. And when they come to the lab, half of them get water and the other half get pretzels. Not a good idea when you're thirsty. And then your task is to identify words as quickly as you can and say yes or no, these are words in the English language. And for words that are thirst-related, those who just had pretzels identify the word significantly faster than those who had water, as compared to control words where there's no effect. So literally, these are words that are top of mind when you're experiencing scarcity, in this case of water. And these are response times that average less than half a second. The responses here are about 400 milliseconds. So literally top of mind, those words are just sitting there, elevated activation, ready to be triggered. And when you have those things top of mind, other things lose, other things are submerged. And so we did one study with dieters in California where we have a control population and then others who are dieters. And we give them these classic word search problems. If you'll see here, the odd number words are related to diets, so cake, donut, sweets, etc. The even number words are neutral. And in condition number 2, we replace the food-related words like cake and donut with street and picture, so neutral again. Now, what I'm going to do is look at how long it takes you to find the words that are the same in both. How long it takes you to find time and cloud, which is the same in both, conditional on whether the other words are food-related or not. And here's what you get. The non-dieters don't care. The dieters take significantly longer to find the word cloud after it's been preceded by a donut, as opposed to when it was preceded by a neutral word. So literally having identified donut, that now stays top of mind if you're dieting and reduces your performance on the next act you have to perform. Again, what's important here, we all understand the idea of sitting down and consciously being concerned. These things take a second and less. It's just your mind is fully geared to detect things that are related to what you're experiencing scarcity with and to neglect others. This is a recent study that's very pretty. This is known as a Stroop effect. These are you've all done some of these where I show you the word green in red ink, and your task is to say red, not green. Here what you do is a little bit different. I show you words like retirement, and your task is to say red. Okay, your task is to ignore the word and say the color. And what you do here is on a separate scale, they divide people into people who are high or low in degree of retirement and financial fears and concerns. So those who are worried and those who are not financially. And then they give them words that are either related to financial fears, like 401ks and pension funds and stuff like this, or words that are neutral, like elevator and sailboat. And what you find again is those who are not terribly concerned show no effect. Those who are concerned take significantly longer to say red when they see retirement than when they see sailboat. So having seen retirement interferes with your capacity, which again is limited to less than a second, to say red. Because a lot of studies of this kind in many areas, including finances, showing when I'm concerned, my capacity is elevated in what I'm doing, the thing I'm concerned with, but reduced everywhere else. And in the book, I don't focus on much today, but in the book we do in fact show that the poor, as many of you know, are remarkably sophisticated in packing their small suitcase and juggling the thing they do. The point is that as you're doing that, as you're tunneling on solving the problem right now very well, the rest suffers. And this takes us to some studies we did in a New Jersey mall. So here we go to people who are shopping in a mall in New Jersey. We ask them to participate in a study, and then we place them in front of a computer screen. We're going to give them financial scenarios that are very close to everyday life. So your car breaks down, it's going to cost X dollars to fix. And those scenarios come in two versions, the easy, the manageable, and the challenging. The manageable, it breaks down, it's going to cost you $150 to fix, which we know most people in the mall can afford. The challenging, the car is going to cost you $1,500 to fix, which we know from independent research for about half of people in the mall is a massive challenge. As you're contemplating the scenarios, to keep things interesting, we're going to have you play some games. And when you finish playing the games, you're going to tell us how you're going to take care of this financial challenge that you have. The games, which are actually kind of fun, are classic instruments in cognitive psych to measure people's cognitive capacity, cognitive control, and fluid intelligence. On the left, what you have to do is when you see a heart, you quickly press the same side, and when you see a flower, you press the opposite side. So you're already getting a little bit of a headache. It's kind of annoying, and it's a divided attention test. You can think about it like a driving test, just quick divided attention. It's called cognitive control. We know from hundreds of studies that when you're mentally busy, you do less well in cognitive control. You drive less well. On the right is a Raven's matrices. All of you have done this before, probably many times. It's an important component of the IQ test. It captures fluid intelligence. It comes as close as possible to getting a test of your working capacity in real time that's supposed to come as close as possible to not distinguishing between a farmer in India and a physics professor at MIT, because it requires very little education. Okay, so that's a test that's used profusely. So they're doing these two tests, and then they're going to tell us how they're going to take care of the car. And independently, we get their household income and divide them simply by median split into rich and poor, low and high income in them all. How do they do? If you look at cognitive control, the rich in them all, those who have the higher income, show no effect on their performance on these tests, on cognitive control, when they're contemplating the easy or the challenging car. The poor, when they're looking at the easy car, look indistinguishable from the rich. They do just as well driving. But when they're contemplating the challenging $1,500 car, they drive significantly less well. Okay, we move to fluid intelligence. The rich, again, show no effect depending on which car they're worried about. The poor are statistically insignificantly different, so they're just like the rich. But when the poor are concerned about the challenging car that's hard to manage, they perform significantly less well on IQ tests. Now, the effect size here, Cohen's d of 0.9, that basically compares to about 13 IQ points. So these are people who a minute ago, when they're contemplating the manageable car, looked just like their friends. And now that there's a challenging car, they're performing at 13 IQ points lower. 13 IQ points, if you look at the qualitative scales used in American schools, that's enough to take you from average to borderline gifted or from average to borderline deficient. It's a big jump. If I keep you all night not asleep, literally just awake all night with loud music, you come in here today about 9 IQ points less intelligent. This means that a poor person who's concerned about a financial challenge feels worse than you do after sitting here after a night without sleep. Okay, so that's the implication. A very big effect. Everything is controlled here, but of course the American rich and the poor are different. They're different health, different education. Maybe there's something going on. So the dream was, can we do this within subjects? Can we get somebody who's both poor and rich? Not easy to do in America in a systematic way, but in other places it's easier. So we ran sugarcane farmers in India. These are people whose bulk of their income comes exactly once a year during harvest. And because they fail to smooth, they find themselves poor before harvest and rich after. So we run the same people now 4 months apart when they're rich and when they're experiencing contexts of plenty or of scarcity. And what we find is that they, again, experience about 10 IQ points lower and perform less well in cognitive control tests in times of scarcity as opposed to plenty. And we try to control for many things. There's no diet effects and other things. We don't have full control of sleep. Okay, so notice what all this implies. All this implies that it's not the poor people who are doing badly, it's people in context of poverty. It's the same person who in a context where there is no sense of poverty does very well. When you put them in context of scarcity, that performance significantly diminishes. This is by far the happiest study of my life. So these are Princeton students who, it's hard to make them poor in money, but it's pretty easy to make them poor in time. So they come into a lab and they're randomly assigned into poor and rich in time. They have either 50 seconds per round or only 15. They play Family Feud games, which they love to play. They like to do really well and appear really capable. They score points, which get translated to money, so they get paid more if they do better. And as they play, there's two versions. In one condition, when you play, when you're out of time, you move to the next round. Nothing you can do. In the other version, you can borrow. So if you run out of time and you want a couple more seconds, you can borrow at predatory lending rates. You borrow at 100%. So if you take another second, you have 2 seconds less left at the bucket of time you have allotted to the experiment. So you can play either way. All this is crossed between rich and poor. If we look at the number of rounds played before you run out of time or points earned, these are the people who cannot borrow. And what you can see is the rich do better and collect more points than the poor. Not surprising, they have more time, they do better. Now let's let them borrow. The rich, when you let them borrow, say, no, thank you, this is predatory lending, not so interested, I don't need it so much. They rarely borrow, and when they do a little bit better, but not worse. The poor, and by the poor I mean the same Princeton students, when they don't have enough time and they're convinced they know the answer to number 3, they grab a couple more points, which they then pay for dearly, run out of time too quickly, and leave the lab with less money. So what we're seeing here is these sophisticates who look great when they have enough resort to payday lending the minute they experience scarcity. And this is to me sort of interesting because it says there's nothing about being poor that resorts you to looking myopic and unplanning. It's about not having enough. And it could happen to anybody, no matter how sophisticated, if you're tunneling and needing 2 more seconds and everything on the periphery diminishes in importance at that moment. We did a lot of these. I'm going to skip some of these. Many different conditions along with windfalls and other conditions where, again, the rich students look very good. The poor students fail to plan well and look very bad. This is just a little bit more of the literature. This is to say air traffic control. So there's a great study that was done on air traffic controllers. It's a good example because these are people who have easy and bad days basically randomly distributed depending on weather conditions and traffic. And so what these sociologists did is they spent weeks sitting in your living room at the end of the day, gauging family interaction. And what they found is that these air traffic controllers are better parents and more attentive spouses on good as opposed to bad days. And again, if you remember, we criticized the poor for being poor parents. Basically what this suggests is you can look like a great parent if you have plenty and a much less good parent if you don't have enough. And these seem to be independent of who you are in some sense. It's the context that dictates it, not your personality or capacity or almost anything else. Now, what does all this mean? Notice one thing I'm telling you is that the poor, in this case, let's focus on the poor and money, when they arrive, they don't only not have enough money, they don't have enough bandwidth. The kind of capacity is loaded. They're unable to detect things in the periphery. And this has interesting implications because your client now is impoverished not just in time or in money, but also in bandwidth. Imagine if I started a new benefits program and said to you, I'm going to do this new program for the poor. I'm going to charge them $300 to join. You're going to say, well, this is strange. You're going to have a take-up problem. They don't have money. Now imagine instead I start a program where I expected they show up exactly at 8 o'clock with a tie and fill out a 30-page application. I might be imposing a bandwidth tax that's comparable to $300. They don't have what it takes to be there with a tie at 8 o'clock and fill out a big questionnaire. And so if you take seriously the bandwidth imposition that we sometimes impose lightly and take the fact that they're poor in bandwidth, that might look a lot like being poor in money and where we're doing things in ways that are at least not thoughtful enough because there are ways often in which we can give you a bandwidth discount by doing the right things. And I'll come back to it in a minute. One more thing that is not in the book, but it's an interesting one. We know for a long time, if I want to influence you or give you a message, there are 2 ways basically. I mean, it's a continuum, but basically you can think about it 2 ways to get to you. I can get to you through your central processor. I talk to you, you stop doing other things, you listen, you parse my message, you weigh the benefits and the costs of what I'm saying, and you decide. That's when you're getting used centrally. Alternatively, if you're thinking about something else, doing something else, cognitively very busy, I can get to you peripherally. I put a picture of a person drinking Coca-Cola. I don't have you parse it. I don't have you interpret it. It just gets to you peripherally. These are roughly 2 ways of doing things. Now, when you have clients who are terribly cognitively busy, notice it's very hard to get to them centrally. It's easy to get to them peripherally. In fact, in some cases, it's easier because they don't have enough cognitive wherewithal to resist the peripheral messaging. Now, this is confounded with actual, how do I send you a message? How do I put a poster on the wall giving you an urge to save for retirement? What poster do I put? It's very hard to do. If you look at what we do to try to convince people to save for retirement, it looks like this. The only way to save for retirement is for me to give you my central process. I have to stop everything, stop worrying about rent and my kids and my food and my everything else and attend to your message. That's not always so easy. Imagine instead I want to convince you to smoke. I don't want you to attend to me centrally because then you'll think of all the reasons why it's a silly message. What I want instead is to plaster you with beautiful people, Italian villas, it's America, so a few guns can help, things like that, to give you the urge to have a cigarette. And this is a built-in problem because some things are very hard to get to people when the central processor is occupied. and benefit messaging of the kind that they would wish to resist if only they had enough attention to spend on it. We did a study in South Africa. I don't know, I'll tell you quickly. This study within South Africa a few years ago where it's not quite a bank, it's a money lender in predatory lending land. And for reasons that I still don't understand, they allowed us to randomize the interest rate that's offered to people. They all get this letter. These are all clients of this bank who have taken a loan at least once, an average of 5 times from this money lender. They get a letter inviting them to apply for a loan. And we randomize the interest rate between 3 and 12 percentage points monthly in gradations of 0.25%. These are over 60,000 recipients, all for real. The loan taken is about 3 months' worth of income. And along with randomizing the interest rate, what we do is we randomize certain behavioral features. So you see here there's a table of 4 examples of kinds of loans you can take. It's just information, but people hate complicated tables. So others, by random assignment, get only 1 example, a much simpler table. You'll see in the bottom there is a picture of a dude in the corner. Others get a dudette, and others get no picture at all. Now what we can do is we can ask, when I change the picture from a man to a woman, what does that do to take-up relative to interest rate? Because it's all crossed and we can do these computations. When you change the table from a complicated to a simple table, take-up of the loan goes up the equivalent of lowering interest 2.3 percentage points monthly. When you change the picture from the dude to the dudette, take-up of the loan on a piece of letter, and this is a picture on a piece of letter you're about to put in the garbage, it's not a poster. Take-up of a loan goes up the equivalent of lowering interest 4.5 percentage points monthly, which is to say, peripheral messages have an enormous impact. And needless to say, it's a problem because a lot of lowball players use them massively. And government, for example, feels it's below them to influence you with little cute pictures, and we're going to lose a lot of battles. And so this is an issue to at least consider. And then, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but there's a lot of interesting issues that arise if you're concerned about people who have limited bandwidth and who are tunneling. I'll give you 2 examples quickly. Take Clinton's 5-year limits on welfare receipt. I'm not suggesting, I'm assuming the intentions were good, but think about it this way. Imagine I said to you now, I'm assigning you a paper due in 5 years. What will you do? You'll do exactly nada for 4 years and 11 months, and then you'll start thinking. When you give people who are tunneling, juggling, managing this week's needs, a 5-year limit, you're basically imposing a program that penalizes but totally fails to motivate. And it's probably not the intention, but it's a badly designed program. You either have to give me 10 half-year limits, you might send me reminders, you've got to do something to bring this issue, which at the end will be very menacing to me, into the tunnel, because I'm not there on a daily basis. To be a little bit provocative, we can talk more about this later, take financial education. Financial education is a massive industry, I don't have to tell you. It's extremely well-intentioned, no doubt. But the data so far, there's a recent meta-analysis many of you would have seen that looked at over 200 attempts to influence people. They found nothing, 0.1 of 1%. If you look at the impact on my financial well-being, not on my ideas, of having taken financial education, there's very little data that's doing anything. If that's the case, notice there's an interesting question. Why are you wasting my time financially educating me? If it's having no effect, let me read Oscar Wilde with my children. It changes the logic completely. And we can talk about why financial education fails. I think there's some good arguments for what we can do and how to think about it. But the question, again, is if you take people who are bandwidth limited and impose on them needs that then do not manifest themselves in everyday lives, it's not clear you're doing them a favor anymore. We tend to think education is always good. I'm an educator. But in these cases, it becomes an interesting question. And as I mentioned, there's forms. We don't take forms seriously enough if you think about the fact that your client is massively bandwidth constrained. This is FAFSA, one of the most generous things we offer people. It's well-intentioned, it's fantastic, take-up is low, and that's the form. And you can see what the problem is. Phil Riopoulos and his colleagues did a study, actually, where they look, the take-up is about 30%. That's the purple and the green. I'm sorry, that's the purple. What they do then is they go to people and say, look, I've checked your finances and everything about you. I know you're entitled to FAFSA, $4,000 a year. Here's the form, and it's the green. There's absolutely no effect. Condition number 3, they go to you and say, I know everything about you, about your household, your income, you're entitled to $4,000 a year. Here's a pre-filled form, let's fill it out together. And actual matriculation in college goes up about 25%. Now, no cost-benefit analysis would make sense of the fact that I'm offering you $15,000, and your tendency to take it and go to college and change your life depends on whether I fill out the form or you fill out the form. No cost-benefit analysis will give you that. The idea that people are simply bandwidth limited, that we all intend to write a will and save for retirement, just not today, makes sense of it, that otherwise would be very puzzling. Opting in, opting out is a perfect example. All of you know that. My favorite is the Glow Cap. The Glow Cap is a $15 plastic capsule that complains if it fails to be opened in time to deliver your medication. Now, it doesn't just complain. It lights up, then it screeches, then it sends you an email and calls you on your cell phone saying, it's time to open me. And think about this. It's too early to gauge, but some people have estimated that in places where people are HIV positive, this could have a 10-year life expectancy effect. Because I'm somebody who believes in it, wants to do it, have the medication in my pocket, but life interferes. And having these intrusions into my tunnel can make an enormous difference. So the last slide, one way to think about it is like designing a cockpit. If you look at aviation today, there's no point training the pilots any further. They're as well trained as we'll get them. What you have to do is design better cockpits. And there are beautiful and painful examples of cockpits that have moved from badly to better designed in the impact that has had. And there are many ways of doing that. We can talk more about that. I'll leave you with the last thought. I'm talking about a bandwidth that's extremely limited. We only can do very little at one time. That little bandwidth that we have that's very limited, we use to do our finances, our banking, attend to our kids' homework, try to eat healthy, remember to exercise. That's the single bandwidth we have. And that has interesting implications, because imagine if I make your banking easier or more friendly. What we tend to do is I improve your banking, and then I come back later to see how you're doing on your banking. But notice that's not quite the right test, because when you give me a gift on banking, I might use that to spend more time with my kids' homework or to eat healthier. So the implications are interesting ones. If you give people a bandwidth gift, but by facilitating their banking, you might find improvements in other aspects of their lives because it's the only bandwidth they got. Okay, I'm going to stop here and we can talk. Thank you.